Hey guys, what's up? John here from flyatmikealpha.com, and today we're going over our VFR sectional chart and VFR flight planning. So we're going to go ahead, fill out a complete navigation log start to finish using the E6B to get you totally familiar with it, using our sectional chart and of course our POH and all the data in it. So let's go ahead and get right to it. So for starters, let's go ahead and draw out where we're going to go. So we've already drawn a line here. Basically, we just went straight from Ann Arbor and we're going to Fitch Beach Airport in Charlotte, Michigan. Exactly, or just over 50 miles, about 52 nautical miles in a straight line here. We draw a straight line between the two airports and that's the line we want to fly. We don't want to pick out checkpoints along the way and then be zigzagging across them. So I look out along this line and I want to go ahead and find some checkpoints to use. So 10 to 15 miles out is a good first checkpoint. So I've gone ahead and selected Chelsea here, Chelsea, Michigan, for our first checkpoint. Now, that checkpoint's directly along our route of flight, which is okay. I actually like to choose checkpoints that are slightly off of my route of flight so I can look out the left or right window and see them as I'm crossing them, as I'm abeam them. When I choose checkpoints that I'm going to fly directly over top, it's very easy as you approach it to look over the nose and think you're there before you really are because it's disappeared under the nose now. So I've got Chelsea, but I've also got the auto proving grounds just off its left. So as I fly over, I want to make sure I'm directly over Chelsea and then see the auto proving grounds, and then in fact I'm at my checkpoint. If I'm directly over the auto proving grounds, or if I see Chelsea off my left window, then I'm either left or right of course. So Chelsea's our first checkpoint that we've chosen. The next one I'm going to go ahead and choose, I'll put it right here. I'm looking for something notable that I can see from the air. So I've got some roads that run here. I've got a power line that runs along across here. And I've also got Leslie, Michigan, I'll be able to see in front of me. So if I see Leslie in front of me, I'm crossing over a power line and there's a road that I'm just flying over top of. Plus I can go ahead and tune in the Jackson VOR and identify radial 034. So when I have all those factors met, then I know I'm right at that point there. And so that'll be our second checkpoint. We're choosing checkpoints about 10 to 15 miles apart. Is a pretty good distance. So that one, that's our terminal chart. So sectional chart scale, that's about 15 miles out, so that's pretty good. For the next checkpoint along this route, we actually have Eaton Rapids here. So Eaton Rapids happens to be a VFR checkpoint to start with. We got the little flag there. So that's a pretty good one. We've got the town, we've got a nice big tower there we can see. So when we're over Eaton Rapids, that'll be our last checkpoint, and then we should be able to shoot our way over to Fitch Beach, Charlotte, Michigan from there. We'll see the town, and then just to the left of the town, we'll see the airport. So we've drawn out our chart here. Now note the common mistakes people make are choosing checkpoints like the auto proving grounds and then choosing a checkpoint like these tanks over here and drawing a crooked line and then having to make all the calculations and fly that crooked course, draw a straight line, fly a straight course, and then choose checkpoints that are slightly left and right of your course, or if they're directly in front of you, just be aware of it and make sure that you're directly over top of it. You don't think that you've passed the checkpoint just because it's disappeared under your nose. You need to be directly over top of that checkpoint. So we've got that done now. Next thing I want to do while I still got this chart up here is I want to take my chart plotter and I want to figure out what course we're going to fly. We know it's generally west, right? So that's 270, this is 360, so it's somewhere westerly. I'll go ahead and take my chart plotter, put my little grommet, my little dot, right over top of the line I drew on the chart. So that's going to go right in the center there. I'm going to twist this thing to line it up here. And I've got my 180 on the longitudinal line and that 360 heading on the longitudinal line. And so I can go ahead and read my true course I've plotted is about 295. Remember, these latitude lines and longitude lines are true north. So we've got a true course about 295 to get there. Now, if we had made some error, say we had held this in a weird way or flipped this around somehow or another, and we had maybe held it like this and lined things up, and we had read that we have, about a 215 course to get there. We know that's not right because 215 would be heading this away from Ann Arbor. So just do the math. It's 25 degrees off of 270, so 295 is our true course. So when you're using a chart plotter, sometimes they can be confusing. Just have that general idea on the direction you want to go to start with so you know when you get an answer, like 215, you're like, okay, that's not correct, or 205, that's not correct, that's actually supposed to be 295. So let's go ahead and ditch this now for a moment here. 295 we said was going to be our true course. So along this route of flight, our true course is 295 degrees. Let's go ahead and fill out all the superfluous information that we can get done and out of the way with now. So our tail number, all our notes that we want to use, along with our frequencies, we'll get as much of this completed so we can start to fill in the boxes, and it's not quite so daunting to get this thing totally filled out. So we've got some of our basic information filled in here. Let's go ahead and fill out our checkpoints. So the first checkpoint is actually where we're departing from, is what we want to put on here. Not the first physical checkpoint that we selected, which was Chelsea. We want to put where we're departing from and then our first checkpoint. So first checkpoint actually won't be Chelsea, it's going to be our top of climb. So when we actually take off and then level off, so as you take off and climb, then you level off, that'll actually be a checkpoint in and of itself, and we'll figure that out here in a minute where that actually is. Then we have Chelsea, Michigan. We have Leslie and the power lines and the big antenna to the side. And there we also have the Jackson VOR that we're going to use. And I'll put a little note here that it's going to be the 034 radial from Jackson. So 034 radial. So then next checkpoint, Eaton Rapids, our top of descent, where we're actually going to go ahead from cruise flight and start on down. And then KFPK, our final destination. So now let's go ahead and put in some other notes here, like what the weather's doing. So we actually have an altimeter setting outside of 3042. We have a temperature outside of -6 degrees centigrade. And we're planning on cruising about 2400 RPM is an important thing to know. So what do you plan to cruise at? And let's go ahead and pull out our POH now. So on the POH, we're going to look at some cruise performance charts. And we're going to figure out what kind of fuel burn we can expect from this thing and what kind of true airspeed. So I said we're going to go at 4,500 feet because we are going to the west. So VFR altitude 4,500, we're about 3,000 feet AGL. So 4,500 will be our altitude. So I filled our altitudes here. We have 4,500 is what we're going to be cruising at. Down here, our top of descent is going to be just down to 1,900 feet MSL because that's going to be about 1,000 feet over field elevation, pattern altitude. And then down here, 900 feet MSL, that is the landing elevation at our airport, 891 feet. We'll round up to 900. So 2,400 RPM is what we're planning. We're going at 4,500 feet MSL with a altimeter setting of 3042. Our pressure altitude is actually going to be 4,000 feet because it's 10 feet per 100th of the inch on the altimeter. So it's 0.5 or half an inch above standard. So we say 1 inch is 1,000 feet, half an inch would be 500 feet. So increasing the pressure by half an inch actually lowers our pressure altitude. If we're at 4,500 feet, it's going to lower it to 4,000. For temperature now, we'll go ahead and look here at the temperature. -6 is 20 degrees below standard temp because normally in Ann Arbor, it's about 1,000 feet above sea level. So 15 degrees and a little less because it's 1,000 feet above sea level. So standard temp is 299 and 15 degrees Celsius at sea level. So we're about 20 degrees off of our standard condition, standard temperature, and about half an inch above our standard altimeter setting. Let's see here for our area, we're going to be using the winds at MKG. So let's go ahead and mark off MKG, and we really only care about them up to 6,000 feet because we're going at 4,500 rather. So we've got a temperature of -12 up there. Now ultimately that means we're looking at about 20 degrees below standard temperature. So we can look at it in our graph here. So 4,000 foot pressure altitude, we said 2,400 RPM, 20 degrees below standard temperature. 65% power is what we can expect out of the engine, 110 knots true airspeed at 9.1 gallons per hour. So let's go ahead and write that in our notes here. 110 knots true airspeed and 9.1 gallons per hour fuel burn is what we can expect. Now, we have a few notes here. Yep, don't go over 75% max continuous power is what they recommend for maximum cruise power. And cruise speeds are shown for an airplane equipped with speed fairings. If we don't have speed fairings on the airplane, we need to decrease these speeds by 2 knots. We actually don't have to do that because we do have the wheel fairings on the airplane. If we didn't, we would just say 108 knots instead of 110. But same fuel burn and everything, that would stay constant, of course. So for other notes here, let's go ahead and figure out the difference between true airspeed calibrated airspeed, and indicated airspeed. So we have a reference of what we should be seeing on our airspeed indicator when we're flying and we set the power at 2400 RPM in level flight at 4,500 feet. So to start out, we're going to go ahead and use our E6B, okay? We said we're doing 110 knots true airspeed. So our E6B tells us down here for airspeed correction, go ahead and put your TAS on the outer scale, and then your CAS is going to be on the inner scale. So we have 110 knots true airspeed. We're going to go 110 there. We're going to go ahead and input our temperature and altitude information. So we said our pressure altitude was going to be 4,000 feet. So I'm looking at 4,000 feet here on the pressure altitude on the inner ring there. Our temperature outside at our cruise altitude is going to be about minus 10 degrees centigrade. So minus 10 degrees centigrade would be on that side of the scale. So right now I got 0 degrees over 4. And I'm going to go ahead and go towards the negative side, so I'm going to go minus 10 on that. So we got minus 10 and 4,000 foot pressure altitude with minus 10 degrees centigrade, 110 knots true airspeed, the 11, because we just had the 0 there. So 110, we read that to be about 107, I would say. So there's 100, there's 110, that's about 107. So now that we have the 107, we're going to go ahead and come back to this chart here. So if we have 107 knots calibrated airspeed, what we're going to see indicated on the instrument to us is going to be 110. So the instrument will actually show 110 knots when we're really have a calibrated airspeed of 107. So we'll go ahead and write 107 for indicated airspeed. I'm sorry, 110 is what we just figured. We'll write 110 knots for our indicated airspeed, indicated airspeed. That's what we're going to expect to see on the airspeed indicator. Some airspeed indicators, like this one here showing, you can actually twist in the altitude you're flying at and the outside temperature, and that will give you a reference as to how fast you're really going for your true airspeed. So then that makes those calculations there in the book irrelevant. That way, the whole idea here is just to make sure that when you set 2400 RPM, you do in fact go 110 knots true airspeed through the air so that you're going as fast as you think you are for your calculations, so you get there on time. If you're going slower with 2400 RPM than you had expected, well, you're going to take longer, you're going to burn more fuel. And of course, if you add power and go more than 2400 RPM to go that speed, you're going to burn more fuel. So you want to just, of course, it all comes down to making sure that you have enough fuel to get there. And as always, err on the side of caution. So anyways, with all this, the next thing we want to do is go ahead and figure out our winds aloft. So we said we're going to go at 4,500 feet MSL. That's 3,000 feet MSL, that's 6,000 feet MSL. Let's figure out what's going on at 4,500 feet MSL. So if it's 330 at 21, and it's also 320 at 27, then we have to average these. So we're going to expect winds of 325 at the average between those. Is 24 knots. So we can expect our winds aloft to be 325 degrees at 24 knots at 4,500 feet MSL. So that is now going to go into our chart here. And obviously the winds are different at the surface. Just for, obviously this isn't a perfect calculation. You can't calculate the winds all the way up as they change in altitude and everything. So we'll go ahead and take a little bit of an average of the winds as they are closer to the surface. And for the rest of these boxes, we'll just put in the actual winds aloft. So 325 at 24, that's our direction and our velocity. And of course, that's a true direction because winds aloft are printed in true directions. So the winds at the surface of Ann Arbor, what we're expecting them to be is 220 at 12 for the time of departure. And of course, this is a forecast as well. We can see it's for use between 200 Zulu and 0300 Zulu. It's important to note when you're using this sheet here that you actually have the right times for the time that you planned your flight. Don't just click on the first winds aloft forecast. Check your valid time on there and check the time that it's planned for use between to make sure, because there's a couple different versions of this you can get based on how far out in advance you want to plan your flight. So we're expecting the winds at Ann Arbor to be 220 at 12 knots, if I can learn to write that correctly there. So 220 at 12, we'll go ahead and take a little bit of an average there since it's a climb up from the surface all the way up to 4,500. You could just use the 325 at 24, Or you could go ahead and average them and try to come up with a little bit more precise number, and we'll try to do that here. So if we have 220 at 12, the average between that is going to be 18 knots. And we'll say the average between 220 and 325 is 270 knots. So 270 at 18, obviously I'm just adding these and dividing by 2 to find my averages. So 270 at 18 is what we're planning. We're down by the surface here, so we'll put in 270 at 18 here. Now as we climb from Ann Arbor up to our top of climb, that first checkpoint is we take off and then we go up and then level off. We're obviously going slower in the climb than we are cruising. So down here our true airspeed, yeah, that'll be 110 knots. And we can even do 110 in the descent if we wanted to, just to keep things simple. We obviously are going to go slower in the climb. So how fast are we gonna go in the climb? Well, we're gonna go ahead and come over to our POH, and it's going to tell us on our performance chart. So we have a time, fuel, and distance to climb, and this is actually gonna tell us exactly how long, how much fuel, and how much distance it's going to take us to climb. The time is going to be constant. The fuel burn is going to be constant. The distance is going to vary based on the winds, and we just said the winds are 270 to 18, so obviously there's going to be a change, a little bit of a shorter distance covered because we have that headwind slowing us down. But the airplane's going to climb up to that altitude the same amount of time, regardless of what the winds are doing. So we're going from, we could say sea level, or a pressure altitude of 1,000, because Ann Arbor is 839 feet, but with that 500-foot reduction because of our pressure altitude, because of the high altimeter setting, that bumps us down to into the 300-some range. And we'll just go ahead and, to be conservative, say sea level is where we're starting. So instead of starting already at 300 feet, we're just gonna say we're starting at sea level. And then we're gonna end up at a 4,000-foot pressure altitude, again, because of that 3042. So we're going from 0 to 4,000. In reality, we're not climbing 4,000 feet because 839, off of 4,500 or 4,500, that's less than 4,000. We're being conservative here. So we're just giving ourselves a little margin of error and erring on the side of caution. So from sea level to 4,000 feet, because 839 would normally be altitude, it's decreased by 500 feet with the altimeter. So we have the pressure altitude of about 300, put it down to sea level, and we're going up to a pressure altitude of 4,000. So we read across here, and we say it's going to take us 6 minutes, 1.5 gallons, we're going to cover 8 miles. So estimated time en route is 6 minutes, and gallons that we're going to burn here, we're expecting it to take 1.5 gallons. Now for our leg distance, we're not going to go ahead and put 8 in there because we know it's going to change. So we're going to just put a note of 8 is what we expected it to be, but that's not what it's ultimately going to be. We'll go ahead and figure that with the ESXB here in a moment. We want to make sure that there's no other pertinent notes on this time, fuel, and distance to climb chart. Obviously it's for max gross weight. If we're under it by a little bit, cool, because we're erring on the side of caution. And then we have 1.4 gallons of fuel for engine start, taxi, takeoff allowance. So we'll want to make a note of that somewhere, that we have some fuel that we're going to burn on taxi and takeoff. So somewhere in this chart here, we're going to have to put our fuel required at an extra 1.4 gallons. So I'll just add that down here at the bottom as 1.4 gallons required, and we know that's going to be our taxi fuel. So I can just write taxi next to it because nothing else is going down these boxes. So next thing we want to do, pull out the E6B. So we'll start making some calculations here based on our wind. We said the wind is 270 at 18. So let's go ahead and set up our E6B here. We have 100 right in the grommet there, and we have a wind strength of 18, and the direction was 270. So we'll put in 270. And 18 knots here. So we put a dot there right at 18. And now we can go ahead and spin in the direction we're actually going to fly. 295 is what we said we're flying. So we spin around 295. We slide that dot down to our true airspeed. So they tell us an indicated airspeed here of 73. Based on our calibration chart, if we come back here, 73 knots is what we're going to be indicating. So we say flaps are up, 73 knots is what we're indicating. It looks like 70 equals 70, 78 equals 80. So if we're indicating 73, I'd say our calibrated airspeed could be 73 too. And if it's also 73 there, then we can go ahead and come over here. And let's just take a little average. So we said we're going up to 4,000 foot pressure altitude. So let's set 2,000 feet in there for a pressure altitude. And then let's go ahead and set our temperature that we expect to be at, which was -6 at the surface and -10 at altitude. So we'll say about -8 or so as an average. So I've got 2,000 foot pressure altitude, 0 temperature. I'll round that over to -8 degrees. And I'll go ahead and read here on my outer scale if I have a indicated airspeed of 73, so 71, 2, 3, then my true airspeed looks like it's going to be 73.5. So, well, to be round, be on the side of caution, we'll just call it 73. Makes it easy. So true airspeed, 73 knots. So we're going to go ahead and then slide this dot on down to 73 knots. As we get down there to 73, we read about 56 is going to be our ground speed. So we can write a ground speed in here of 56 is what we expect. Notice where the dot is. It's to the left, so minus on the left, plus on the right. We're going to subtract to find our wind correction angle. 2, 4, 6 degrees. There's 8 and 10. We have that 10 degree line, the 20 degree line there. So it looks like -6 degrees in our wind correction angle. We could fill that part out. We have our wind correction angle right here, -6. So we have our true course, -6, gives us a true heading of 289, plus minus east-west variation. Well, then we are going to go ahead and come over here to our sectional chart, find an isogonic line. Looks like we got an isogonic line here of 6 degrees west. West is best, east is least. So when you have 6 degrees west, you add 6. So we'll go ahead, come back here, and well, there we go, we're adding 6. And now that brings us back to the 295 originally. That's our magnetic heading. In the airplane, it says for 270, steer 272 because of the magnetic deviation in the airplane due to the electronics and radios and things like that. So that's plus 2 degrees for 270, steer 272. So for 295, probably need to steer 297. And we'll put in 297, gives us a compass heading of 297. That's what we're going to fly on our compass. That's what we're going to fly on our DG because our DG is set to our compass. You want to fly a heading of 297 while you're climbing out up to 4,500 feet. Now, how far did we go? Well, we were going for 6 minutes at 56 knots. So I could go ahead and do some math here. It's easier to do on my phone. You could use the E6B, and we have a video on that as well in the E6B computations, but I like doing it quick and easy on my phone if I could ever find the app for the calculator. So 56 knots, 6 minutes. It's simply going to be 6 minutes over 60. That's 1/10 of an hour, obviously. We multiply that by the 56 knots that we're going, and that tells us 5.6 nautical miles is how far we're going to cover. So our leg distance became 5.6 nautical miles. Now, I hate doing the 0.6 thing. I'd rather just round up. Obviously, you don't want to keep rounding constantly because you're not as precise then. We'll go ahead and leave that as 5.6, and we'll do the rest of this with decimals. But if you get into a whole lot of decimals, try to simplify things, round a little bit, and just put some extra gas in the airplane. And if you're doing a 50-mile cross country, and you find out that's going to take you about 5 gallons of gas to get there, or 5.6 gallons of gas, or 5.8, then go ahead and throw in an extra 3 or 4 or 5 gallons of gas, and that should give you a pretty good margin of error for any rounding things like this, like difference between 5.6 and 6, or 5.6 and just 5. So, what's our total distance to actually get there? We said it was 52 nautical miles is what we had measured on the sectional chart using our plotter, boom, like that, with not the terminal area chart scale. We use the sectional chart scale. 52 nautical miles, cool. So 52, and now we're gonna go ahead and minus 5.6 off of that, which gives us 46.4, and that's how much distance we have remaining to get all the way over to Charlotte or Fitch Beach Airport there. Now, what's the distance between Ann Arbor and our next checkpoint? Or what's the difference between top of climb and our next checkpoint, Chelsea? So it's simplest just to measure this using the sectional chart scale, and the distance between Chelsea and Ann Arbor comes out to be, oh, looks like, what do we have here? I'd call that about 13 miles. And if we take 13 miles and we subtract the 5.6, then we're left with 7.4. So our next leg is 7.4 miles long. And we'll go ahead, take the 0.4 off there, take the 7 off there, and we got 39 miles to go. What's the difference? What's the distance between Chelsea and Leslie? Well, we've got about, let's see here, I'd call that a solid 16 miles. What's the distance between Leslie, our checkpoint in front of Leslie there rather, and Eaton Rapids, I'd call that about 15 miles. If you want to do this more accurately, just stick with the 0 over where you start from. Stick with the 0 over at Ann Arbor. You can see easily that's 13, that's 29, and that's 44. So that'll be a little more accurate than moving it each time. So we can go ahead and fill in those numbers here. We've got 16 is the difference between Chelsea and Leslie and the power lines on the antenna and all that. The next one we said was going to be 15 nautical miles. And then here in a moment, we'll figure out what we're doing with our top of descent, how far it is from Eaton Rapids to the top of descent and all that good jazz. Note that the actual numbers here, so see we have ground speed estimated, that's what we're estimating in our planning. Actual is not going to be filled out until you're actually in the airplane. Actual time en route won't be filled out until you're in the airplane because you have no idea how long it's going to take you until you actually fly it and figure out how long it took you. Actual time of arrival, you'll fill out in the airplane. Fuel remaining, we can fill out planning wise, but any of the actuals, we just leave for when we're in the airplane. So, next thing we want to do is figure out what kind of heading we're going to be flying, what kind of ground speed we're going to get, what kind of time en route we have between each checkpoints, and what ultimately the compass heading will be along the rest of the route of flight. So, going back to our E6B, we now have winds of 325 at 24, so let's go ahead and set it up for that. So 325 is our true wind direction. Slide that grommet up to 100 so we have a nice even place to start from. If the E6B doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you, especially this wind correction stuff, we have a whole entire video dedicated to it, so you can go ahead and check that out on our website. 100, 325, and we said the wind speed is 24 knots, so we'll put that dot at 24. And dots at 24 are good. We'll go ahead and then spin in our true course. Our true course is 295 for this entire flight. We're not going to change our course until we're directly over the airport at Fitch Beach. And then we're going to be maneuvering to enter the traffic pattern. So 295. And now we'll go ahead and spin in the 295 there. We got 295, we slide that down to our true airspeed, which we said is 110 in cruise flight. So 110, we read a ground speed of 82.46, I'd say 87 knots would be our ground speed based on those numbers. So 87 knots is what it's going to be along this route of flight. Wonderful. Let's note our wind correction angle here. So we have a wind correction angle of plus 246 degrees this time based on the wind. So plus 6 degrees. So wind correction angle is plus 6. Our magnetic variation for the area on that isogonic line is still going to be the same thing, still 6 degrees. So we're still adding 6 there. So we have 301 plus 6 gives us 307. And the deviation in the airplane, we said for 270, steer 272, so it's plus 2. We add 2 there, we get 309 is the compass heading we're going to want to fly for this flight. As long as we're maintaining 110 knots and we have those same winds aloft, then 309 degrees is going to work. Our ground speed is going to be 87. And we could fill in all these other things. At this point, I ultimately just say it's the same. So there's no sense in killing yourself with all the extra writing. So keep the sheet as clean as possible. We just know we're going to be doing 309 for a compass heading. Now we have to go ahead and find out what our estimated time en route is and what the fuel burn is going to be. So the fuel burn we said is 9.1 gallons per hour. So how much fuel burning depends on how long we're spending between each checkpoint. So again, you could use the E6B. We'll show you how to do that in another video. I prefer the calculator method. Thus, we have 7.4 nautical miles to cover. If we have 7.4 nautical miles to cover and we're doing 87 knots, 7.4 divided by 87 gives us 0.085 of an hour. I multiply that by 60, gives me 5.1 minutes. So then I take the 5 off. I'm going to multiply that by 60 to get seconds. Whoops. And that's going to give me a total of 5 minutes and 6 seconds, I'm comfortable saying. So 5 minutes and 6 seconds. Now, for simplicity's sake here, I'm going to say that we're planning to depart exactly at noon. We're going to do all these times in local. So noon, local, and that means our estimated time of arrival there would be 12:06. Our estimated time of arrival here would then be 12:10. 11 and 6 seconds. And we'll go ahead and complete this on down. Now, if we're going 5 minutes and 6 seconds, how much fuel do we burn? Well, we simply said that all that was, with the 7.4 divided by 87 knot ground speed, 0.08 of an hour. I could just simply multiply that 0.08 of an hour by the 9.1 gallons per hour burning, and 0.77, I'll round that up to 0.8, and I'll say gallons required, fuel required, 0.8. I'll also go ahead and say we started here with 50 gallons usable in our tank, so 50 gallons usable because we like to be extra cautious. How much fuel do we have remaining after we take off out of Ann Arbor? Well, we have the 1.5, but remember we had the taxi fuel down there. So I'm just gonna go ahead and take that taxi fuel out of there right from the get-go. So that would leave me with 48.6 usable when we take off. And 48.6 minus the 1.5 gives us 47.1. So now there's 47.1 gallons in the tank after we level off climbing out of Ann Arbor. As we climb up, level off, we should have 47.1 gallons. We burnt the 1.4 taxi and run up, and we burned some climbing out 1.5 gallons. After going from our top of climb, the next 7 miles over to Chelsea, we're gonna burn 0.8. So we'll take another 0.8 off there. We're gonna get 46.3 remaining. And I'll go ahead and do the rest of the math here to just quickly get through this. So we've got 16 miles to cover, divided by 87 gives us 0.1839 of an hour. I multiply that by 60. That gives me 11 minutes, 11.03 minutes. I minus the 11. I multiply that by 60. I get 2 seconds, 11 minutes, 2 seconds is what that's gonna take. Now it's a good thing to ask yourself, does that make sense? 7.5 and then a little over double takes, well, a little over double, right? So that does make sense. We're still doing the right calculations here. Do that same thing again. 16 divided by 87, 0.1839 of an hour times the 9.1 gallons per hour gives us 1.67. I'll call it 1.7 gallons to burn between Chelsea and the Leslie Power Lines antenna checkpoint. So 1.7 off of that is going to give us 44.6. Now I went ahead and I dropped the 12 off here, the noon o'clock, because I just didn't have enough room to write in the box. So simply 22 minutes and 8 seconds into the flight, we'll be at our next checkpoint here, and then 32 minutes, 29 seconds in, that's when we're gonna be hitting Eaton Rapids. At Eaton Rapids, we'll have 43 gallons remaining. And now we have to go ahead and figure out where our top of descent is gonna be in relation to Fitch Beach. So initially I'd written down 019. I actually think I'd like to change that. I think I'd like to cross the field at 1500 to be a little safer. So we're gonna plan 024. And so we'll level off at 2,400 feet, which is 500 feet above pattern altitude there. We'll cross over the field just to make sure that the windsock is in fact indicating the same thing that the AWOS says. And we can make sure we don't see any other airplanes moving around, check the traffic pattern, what's going on, and then come back out, descend back in, and fly the normal traffic pattern. How long is all that gonna take? Well, conservatively, I'd say it's gonna take no more than 10 minutes. Probably only gonna take 3 or 4 minutes, but let's say 10 minutes. And so, to be conservative, saying 10 minutes, well, at cruise altitude and cruising RPM, 10 minutes burns about 1.6 gallons of gas. Down low, I could go ahead and see how much that changes and figure it again. So 10 minutes flying down around low, say a pressure altitude of only maybe 2,000 feet, maybe we're maneuvering or whatever, so we're gonna go on the side of caution here, 2,500 RPM, and it's still cold out, so 10.6 gallons per hour. 10 minutes of that would be 1.6. So we can go ahead and just say it's less than 2 gallons, but we'll add another 2 gallons in just for maneuvering around the Fitch Beach Airport, going out, flying the traffic pattern, and observing everything that's going on in the field. So I'll add another 2 gallons here just to be on the safe side. Now here's the tricky part. So we don't have any sort of information on how much we're gonna burn when we descend. We have the cruise performance chart, and we could say, well, hey, we're gonna go ahead and reduce to this many RPM and have that much power, and we're gonna burn that much gas, but we're descending, so we're keeping true airspeed. You could do that, but you don't really have a chart for it. So I like to go, when I don't have this, I just err on the side of caution here, and I say, okay, I'm gonna still be burning 9.1 gallons an hour. Obviously I'm not, because I'm gonna be throttling back. But I'm gonna descend at 500 feet a minute, and if I descend at 500 feet a minute with a ground speed of 87 knots, how soon before getting to the airport to end up directly over top of the airport at 2,400 feet do I have to start my descent? So if I'm trying to lose 2,000 feet, and it's obviously 2,100 feet, 500 feet a minute, well, that'd be 4 minutes plus the extra 100 feet. That's an extra 20% of a minute. So 20% of a minute is 12 seconds. So 4 minutes and 12 seconds, or really 4.2 minutes. So in 4.2 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and burn, if I was burning 9.1 gallons per hour, 4.2 minutes divided by 60 times 9.1, well, I'm going to burn about 0.7. So I'll conservatively say to get down, I'll burn 0.7. It's going to take me 4 minutes and 12 seconds. So I'll put the 412 there. And then how much distance I'm going to cover in 4 minutes and 12 seconds? Well, 4.2 minutes out of an hour when I'm doing 87 knots is 6 miles. So I'll say about 6.1 nautical miles. And so with the distance of 6.1 nautical miles to get from 4,500 down to Fitch Beach Airport, then I can go ahead and start working backwards here. Obviously, once I arrive there, my distance remaining should be 0. So now I just have to do a little bit of process elimination, fill in the blank. So when I fill in these numbers here, then I go ahead and say, okay, 6.1, well, the distance, if I had 8 miles remaining, now I have 6.1 to cover in my descent. Well then, all I really have to do, if I'm doing 500 feet a minute, is say 1.9 nautical miles from Eaton to the top of descent. So 1.9 miles after crossing Eaton Rapids, I'm gonna be starting on down. And that's gonna leave me with the 6.1 miles remaining. And of course I eat that up on the last bit there. So how long does it take to go 1.9 nautical miles? Well, we do our normal math that we've always been doing here. It takes about 1 minute and 20 seconds. So we'll say 1 minute and 20 seconds there. That gives us an estimated time of arrival of 33 minutes and 49 seconds into our flight. So it's important to note this is realistic flight training. This isn't in reality what you're actually going to be doing. You're going to put the 0.7 in the wrong box ultimately, like I did, and then you're gonna have to go find whiteout and white it out and fix it. So you're gonna do plenty of whiting out when you first fill out one of these silly little navigational logs. So we've got that fixed there. Now we said 4 minutes and 12 seconds. So that's gonna bring us up to 38:01. This is gonna be a 38-minute and 1 second flight to get all the way from Ann Arbor to Fitch Beach. Because of that awful headwind on the way back, it'll be a lot less, probably be under 30 minutes. So 38 minutes and 1 second, we get there, we're over top of the airport, then we planned about 10 minutes or so maximum for maneuvering. We added the 2 gallons of gas. How much fuel did it take us to go that 1.9 nautical miles? Well, not a whole heck of a lot, but let's make sure we have that fuel factored in there. 1.9 over 87, that's 0.02 of an hour, and 9.1 gallons per hour, 0.2 gallons. Now, like we said, we're gonna be reducing power. We're not gonna be burning 9.1 gallons an hour anymore in the descent. We'll be burning the 0.2 there, but we really won't burn 0.7 here. It's just erring on the side of caution. So 42.8 minus the 0.7, 42.1. Minus the 2 for messing around the airport gives us remaining, I'd say, about 42. We already factored in the taxi before we took off, so we don't have to worry about that. We should land with about 42 gallons in the tank. So, 42 gallons in the tank, that sounds pretty good to me. That's more than the 30-minute requirement and more than my personal 1 hour requirement that I have for landing with. So the last and final thing we have to do here, obviously, we're gonna go back and fill out all this information when we actually get in the airplane and get the actual information. We're gonna go ahead and leave most of this stuff blank. We could put in our frequencies for Ann Arbor and our destination, but ultimately there's no VORs we're using along our course, and the routes are pretty much all direct, so I just use those boxes as extra little information I can fill in there, like the 034 radial for Jackson. But no frequencies or identifiers for VORs along our route of flight. So one other option I want to point out here is if we change our winds because we're descending and we would go ahead and take the average of the winds. So average of the winds, 325 at 24 is what they were up at altitude we figured, and 220 at 6 is what they're planned to be at our estimated time of arrival into Charlotte, Michigan. So 270 at 15 would be the average. We can try it that way and just see how much of a difference it really makes. So it's still going to take the 4 minutes and 12 seconds to get down, but it may start changing this distance here, and then of course our time, and then our fuel just a little bit. So let's see by how much. So if the winds change a little bit, just let's take a look at how much that affects us. So 270 at 15 is what we're planning for now, and still a true course of 295. So let's go ahead and dial this guy up. 270, we'll set our grommet to 100, put our dot there at 15 above our grommet. So we got the 115, so 15 knots above, 270, dial it into 295, slide the dot down to our true airspeed, 110, read our ground speed to instead be about 95, so we're going a little faster. So if our ground speed was then 95 all of a sudden, where this is going to change is it's actually going to cover more ground in the descent, thus we'll start our descent sooner. So we would be burning less fuel here. How much fuel and time is that going to change really? Not a whole heck of a lot, because how much less fuel than 0.2 gallons can you burn? Well, that's not much at all anyways. And how much less time can you fly for than a minute and 20 seconds? Well, a minute and 20 seconds isn't much either. But if we want to just see how much that changes for us, 95 knots, 4 minutes and 12 seconds doing 95 instead of 87. So in our descent, we're going to cover 6.7 miles instead of 6.1. So if we were to cover 6.7 miles instead of the 6.1, then that changes by about 0.6. So now we're only covering 1.3. So if we're only covering 1.3 instead of the original 1.9, then that of course will be a little bit less time and a little bit less fuel. How much, you might ask? Well, it's going to be 54 seconds instead of a minute and 20. So it's going to be a difference of about 26 seconds. So is that a big deal? Is it not? Well, it is and it isn't. I'd like to see you or any of my students get to their destination plus or minus 2 minutes of what they calculated. So you have to be pretty precise if you're going to do that. So if you're really trying to be spot on, then yeah, you're gonna have to go back and make those adjustments and make those guesses as to what the winds are doing higher and lower. Could you just do it simple and just keep the winds the same all the way down after you hit top of climb, all the way on down, and get the same magnetic heading and the same course heading? Sure, you could. Ultimately, you're gonna probably be backing this up with GPS on either your cell phone or iPad or GPS mounted in the airplane. So is this that crucial? It is, because you need to be able to fill one of these out, understand it, and in a perfect world, I'd love to see you fly without any GPS or anything. I typically make all my students do this at least once, fly using just this, using a compass and a stopwatch. If you can find your way there with a compass, stopwatch, and a sectional chart to figure out where you are off course, oftentimes you might take off out of Ann Arbor, fly that heading you had planned to 297, hit your top climb, level off, and then start flying a heading of 309 like you had planned, and you wind up looking out the window and going, hey, there's a town off to our right, and we're directly over the auto proving ground, so we're left of course. So now we have to fly a heading of maybe 320 or 330 to try to get back and hit this next checkpoint, and then you're directly over it. So if you flew a heading of 330 and you end up directly over it, then maybe you want to fly a heading of 320 and the winds are different than you had planned for, and now instead of a 309 heading, you're flying 320. So there is that adaptation in the airplane, and of course that's why we're writing in how long it takes us to get to each spot when we're in the air. Because if we notice that we planned 6 minutes and then we planned for 5 minutes, 6 seconds here, so 11 minutes and 6 seconds, we should have been over Chelsea, and it took us 15 minutes to get there, the winds could be a lot stronger. Thus, we're gonna take a lot more time to get to Charlotte, to FPK, and we're gonna burn more fuel. If we get here, now we're 30 minutes into the flight, and we had figured 22 minutes, then we're burning a lot more gas and it's taking a lot longer than we had thought. So when you have 40 gallons on board, another 4 hours of usable fuel, is that the end of the world? Not really, I would just keep going. But if you had only taken off with say maybe 20 gallons on board, or even 15, because that would be legal, you're only gonna burn about 8 gallons this entire flight, well, then you need to start rethinking things. If you took off with 15 gallons, you're burning 8, but it's taking you a lot longer, you might consider turning around and using that tailwind to get you the heck on back and get some more fuel in your airplane before you try to go over there. So guys, that's all I have for you. Ultimately here, what I want you to take away from this, you need to know how to do one of these things. I make all my students do this at least once and fly me somewhere using just this, a stopwatch, a compass, and a sectional chart along the way and figure their way out. So ultimately, when you're taking off out of Ann Arbor and you get blown a little off course, you have to see that, figure it out on the sectional chart, make small adjustments, and get me to that destination using just the old school methods in case the batteries die on your GPS or you lose electrical power for the panel power GPS or your cell phone stops working with that GPS app or whatever. So ultimately, you need to know how to do one of these things. You gotta do it at least once. The more you do them, the faster you get at them. Most DPEs, and myself included, I would never require a student to do something like this for a checkride or a stage check because it's not realistic to how you're going to fly the aircraft as a private pilot. You're gonna use GPS. Everyone does nowadays, totally fine. But you need to understand the basics behind this thing, so when your iPad is calculating all these different angles and wind correction angles and ground speeds, and it makes an error, you need to be able to detect that so that you don't take off in your airplane when your iPad told you it's only gonna take 5 gallons of gas to get from Ann Arbor over to Charlotte, and it actually is gonna take 8 or something, and you run out short of the field because the winds were different and because the iPad made a miscalculation or something. So you need to be smarter than the technology, garbage in, garbage out with technology. Same thing with this, you need to have good data good numbers. Make sure you're getting current forecast for your time of it you're actually planning to fly. Any questions on this stuff, guys? I'm sure you'll have some questions. Leave them in the comments below. Be more than happy to try to help you out. If you want one-on-one prep with a CFI or one-on-one help with this from a CFI, go on flymikealf.com. You can go ahead and sign up for that. And of course, it comes with our checkride prep courses. If you sign up for our membership for checkride prep and all our checkride prep courses and written prep courses on there, you'll get one-on-one help from a CFI, and you can even ask for help on this specific topic. Make sure you give us a thumbs up on the video, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you keep up with our latest videos as they come out. It's the best way to keep up with us on YouTube. Check out everything we have on flymikealf.com. Sign up for our ground schools on there. Tons of awesome resources from private pilot ground school, instrument pilot, commercial pilot, and so on. As always, guys, if you can't fly every day, fly at mikealfa.com. We will see y'all next time.